maybe right out of the gate, how many of you are uh, not the lead pastor? So you're serving in a capacity different than the lead pastor, just so you get a sense of how many non-lead guys are here. Okay, quite a few. So maybe just...
How many of you are lead pastors? Would you raise your hand? Okay.
There's more non-lead.
Yeah.
So maybe just for their sake, right out of the gate, what is a good resource for lay pastors to understand their role? Given that today's primarily focused on the lead guy, given their role.
Yeah.
Any initial thoughts for the others?
Yeah, two little short books. Jeremy Rennie, Elders, Rinnie, Jeremy Rennie. He was a pastor for a long time. He's from Nevada, pastored for a long time on the South Shore of Boston. And then, with the church going great, after being there almost 20 years, decided to move to Abu Dhabi. And he is now pastor of the Evangelical Christian Church of Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. And he wrote a little book called Elders that's really good. Or an old classic, David Dixon, Church Elders, the Ministry of the Elders. Anyway, David Dixon's grand old Presbyterian work. And he's especially good on talking about lay elders and their work.
Rennie and Dixon, okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, you got a question here. And by the way, again, you can text your questions into the number at the bottom of your handout you received on the way in. If I don't get to all of them, we're gonna have a number of these throughout the day. Hope to get to all of them if we can. You mentioned the church should have real Christians, not nominal Christians, or at least tailor what you're doing for real Christians. Question came in, what then is the hope for nominal Christians to become real Christians? What do you do if the vast majority of your church fall into that category?
Well, fortunately, you can't know if that's the case. I think in heaven we might be surprised by who really are Christians, in good ways and bad ways. So you can't really know that. What you can do is just not try to tailor the church to the kind of lowest common denominator of bare religious interest, to entertain and bedazzle so that people are go, whoa, and want to come, you know. I mean, that's not going to help long term. You can get a crowd that way, but what you want is something that lasts. So you need people whose lives are really changed. So you need people who are really converted. So of course there will always be nominal Christians around churches, just like there are always, you know, flies around cows. I understand that, you know.
It's a great illustration.
I am from rural Kentucky. Just came to mind. But so, you know, the spiritually poor we will always have with us. I think you serve them well by being crystal clear on the gospel and what it means to be a Christian. So I feared when I went to the church in Washington, it was full of older people who had been there a long, long time, like 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years. I feared there would be a lot of nominal Christians. So I deliberately decided I wanted to preach at the beginning from a gospel. And I thought I'd choose Mark's gospel, because if I have anybody who's liberally educated, they'll think it's the least theologically redacted. And I just want Jesus to offend them to pieces. I just want Jesus to defend clearly what it means to be. If I go to Paul, I'll have somebody saying, you know, he heard from a Sunday school teacher back in the 1960s that Paul is really, you know, conservative and not trustworthy. And so let me just go to Jesus and let's just get it clear of what it means to follow Jesus and kind of build out from there. Because if we're not clear on what it means to be a Christian, there's just nothing else we can usefully spend our time on.
That's good, that's helpful. Question here about how do we keep the church and ministry from becoming an idol or just overly important to the sacrifice of other things, maybe our families, our wives, maybe our own health? How do we navigate that tension?
I think if you're a single pastor, by that I don't mean the only one in the pastor of the church, I mean a man who's not married. If you're a single pastor, I think that's harder. I would say that you need to have good, close spiritual friendships that know your life well. I've known some marvelous single pastors. Dick Lucas pastored for decades at St. Helens Bishopsgate in London and did a wonderful job as a single man. If you're married, the basic answer is your wife.
Just ask her how you're doing.
She knows how you're doing.
Yep. Okay. We got a number of questions here also about membership.
So just on that, I got young guys in our church all the time who have these really spiritual ideas of what God wants them to do. And their wife is not necessarily excited about it. And so they come to me trying to figure out how they can better lead their wives. And I tend to think, that could be right, maybe 1 out of, 100 times. But I tend to think that the Lord is leading them clearly through the Bible, and after that, it's probably their wife. Because they've pledged before the Lord to care for them. And if you've married a Christian woman and she loves you and loves the Lord, then I think you have a good right to assume that her prosperity, in a godly sense, not in a selfish, carnal sense, but in a godly sense, is your honor and joy. You want to cherish that. And so her prospering is a very simple first step in directing your ministry. So I think by God's grace, we've saved any number of young men from kind of wrecking their marriages in the name of ministry by telling them they really shouldn't be doing what they're doing. They needed to move to someplace else and love their wife better, and the Lord would have plenty for them to do.
I think what often happens is that the wife doesn't know any better about what ministry and church life look like, so they permit their husbands to work in that way, thinking that this is just the cross I have to bear.
Yep.
So are there specific questions you would encourage pastors to ask their wives to help draw them out?
Yeah, I mean, when you say specific questions, I would need to know the situations better. I can tell you what I've done certainly with my own staff, an executive, and our senior staff, our guys who are there for decades like me. I've done this exercise with them before where I said, I want you to go home and ask your wife to write 2 paragraphs. She has to, and she should know that it's going to be shared with the rest of us, the rest of the senior staff. Number 1, does the church give your husband enough time off? And number 2, does your husband take enough time off? 2 separate questions. And then we've had them bring those back, and we've literally spent an entire staff meeting of 2, 3, 4 hours just with one guy, listening to his first paragraph and then going around talking to him about that, and then his second paragraph and go around and talk to him about that. So just simple things like that, little common wisdom can be helpful in trying to sync up a wife's godly expectations with what you try to provide as a church.
That's exactly what I hoped you were going to talk about. Thanks for doing that. We have 3 minutes.
There are other things you know you want to talk about. You can just dispense
They're
with
not
the
here.
question.
They're not here to. Tell them that story about. So we have 3 minutes here, but we can squeeze a couple questions in. What practical habits have helped you be a man of prayer when ministry was especially busy? Anything you found to be practically helpful?
I think probably the most helpful thing, I would just describe it to God's grace in my life. I just have an unbendable practice of it is the first thing I do every morning. And it's been like that since I came to Christ as a teenager. I will not do anything else. I don't care what I have to miss or not do. I will not do anything else until I've had my quiet time. It is the first thing I do every morning. And just that commitment in myself has been helpful.
Yeah, amen. Good question here about just the young pastors in the room in particular. You just spent 50 minutes, I think, answering this, but I would love to hear your thoughts to young pastors in particular regarding a couple of key personal choices we need to make now that set a trajectory of faithful ministry long term. Any decisions they can make now at this point in the ministry that would set them up for long-term faithfulness?
Again, a brother's temptations are going to be various, but a common one is what an earlier question alluded to, which is a kind of burnout. And I think just protecting your own schedule in the sense of deciding that you're going to run in a way you can continue to run. And that's where, if you're married, your wife can be so helpful to you in that. I don't want to make it seem like wives and families never have anything to give up. Well, they certainly will. You'll have stuff to give up. But on the whole, there needs to be a clear priority that you give to the welfare of your family. Because your church can get another pastor, but your wife can't get another husband. Your kids can't get another dad. So I think that has to be your priority in that sense. Though, of course, sometimes, you're not going to be at dinner because you're at this committee meeting. But you just need to keep an honest communication going with your wife so that you're getting as good a feedback as you can about how that's going. And if you always find yourself in exceptional circumstances, then you kind of need to reboot. And you maybe get another friend who's a pastor, pull back, talk to him about that, go over those things so he can speak to you directly.
It's good. You guys, great questions you're sending in. We're getting a ton. Remember, you don't have to wait till the Q&A to send them in. We have some folks kind of editing them as we go along here. So if you have any others, we're going to try to hit them up as we go out through the day. But for now, let's take a 15-minute break, and we'll reconvene at 10:45 for session 2.